US President Donald Trump's deal of the century offers what all the previous summits, roadmaps and conferences attempted for the Muslims to accept the status quo and give up any claim to the fact that both the Zionist entity and US presidents face impeachment, fraud and electoral polls is not lost upon anyone. President Trump on Tuesday 29th of January unveiled details of his long-touted deal of the century for Palestine. Trump's announcement of the deal, flanked by the Zionist Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and with no Palestinians present, was very revealing. The US published its strategic document Peace to Prosperity that contained conceptual maps showing the Zionist entity what a future Palestinian state would look like. The document was prepared without any Palestinian input.
When we look at President Trump's proposed plan, it's important to remember how Palestinian territory has vanished over the past century. And if we wind back to before the British Mandate for Palestine in 1917, this was the map. Just 3% of the population were Jews, but over the next 30 years of British rule, Jewish immigration increased. And when the mandate expired in 1948, the State of Israel was created and its military expelled at least 750,000 Palestinians from their homeland. Then, during the 1967 war, Israel expanded its territory into the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, occupying all of historic Palestine. In the 1990s, under the Oslo Accords, Palestinians were given some powers of self-rule, but remained under Israeli military occupation. Since then, hundreds of thousands of Israelis have moved into settlements built on that occupied land, which is against international law. And this is how a future Palestinian state could look under Trump's proposed plan. Israeli territory would separate the two main Palestinian centres of Gaza and the occupied West Bank, though there'd be a tunnel between them. But all of these Israeli settlements dotted inside Palestinian territory would be recognised by the US. And while the plan would create a capital for the Palestinians, it's not East Jerusalem. It's in the eastern outskirts, cut off from the Old City and the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound by a concrete separation wall and Israeli checkpoints. Trump says Jerusalem will be Israel's undivided capital. Groups like Amnesty International have rejected the plan, saying it would exacerbate tensions and endorse Israel's half-century of occupation.
The response to the Trump and Netanyahu deal has been very mixed. Palestinian groups, leaders and the Zionist entity's security establishment all condemned the proposal. So what is the deal of the century? The deal being offered is the codification of the Zionist position. It in no way is a serious proposal for negotiated peace on all the major issues such as security, territory, refugees and Jerusalem. The Trump administration is telling the Palestinians that the long-standing demands require them to recognize they have lost this conflict and accept the realities that have been established on the ground. The Trump deal of the century requires the Muslims of Palestine who were expelled from their homes yielding to Zionist occupation of large parts of the West Bank and Jordan Valley. Palestinians must forego even symbolic refugee returns to their homes, accepting an embassy only in the remote outskirts of Jerusalem, which the Zionist entity would control as an undivided city, giving the Zionists the sole right to determine when, if ever, Palestinians can take charge of their own security, and the right to reoccupy Palestinian territory if its own security is threatened. This is a new Palestinian state being offered as the deal of the century. The purpose of the cursed deal of the century is to end the conflict between the Arabs and the Jews without resolving it. Its aims are no different to all the other roadmaps, Camp David agreements and summits to make the Zionists a permanent part of the region. In order to do so, normalization must occur between the Muslims and the Zionists by means of bribes presented in the form of investments and an economic deal. They are replacing the political side of the Palestinian cause with the economic side, exchanging cash and economic development for the politics. The deal is not being announced, but rather it is being implemented.
Palestinians say the proposed Middle East plan put forward by the US president changes nothing and actually makes things worse.
The US-based think tank Council of Foreign Relations highlighted it was not surprising that Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas immediately rejected the plans. Trump's decisions to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, recognize Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights, close to the US diplomatic mission to the Palestinians in Jerusalem, and make harsh cuts to US humanitarian assistance for Palestinians. It's hard to see Palestinians responding favorably to a plan that they had no input on, leans so heavily towards Israeli position, and was presented in Washington by Trump alongside Netanyahu with no Palestinians in sight. Despite the condemnation of the deal for being so one-sided, it has received overwhelming support from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Bahrain, Qatar and Morocco, who endorsed the deal before it was even announced. They championed the deal even though they were not involved or party to its content.
First of all, there's no Palestinians in the frame. They are boycotting the United States. They rejected the plan. Everyone knows the details. However, there were three Arab League member ambassadors in the room, which was incredible.
Oman, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates.
Yes, I guess there were others who could have been there but didn't go because it's still too delicate. And this is the whole story. This is the whole story.
The alliance between Gulf nations and the Zionist entity has been developing over the past 2 decades with informal intelligence sharing and limited security cooperation over terrorist threats and Iranian proxies. They, alongside Saudi Arabia, have normalized the presence of the Zionist entity in the region. They have now even stopped the rhetoric against the Zionist entity.
Palestinians had declared the Trump deal dead on arrival many months ago, and as he was preparing to unveil it in Washington, in the West Bank they were on the streets. In the White House, the choreography said it all. 2 leaders keen to find distractions, keen to be re-elected, unveiling the so-called deal of the century.
My vision presents a win-win opportunity for both sides, a realistic 2-state solution that resolves the risk of Palestinian statehood to Israel's security. Today, Israel has taken a giant step toward peace. Under this vision, Jerusalem will remain Israel's undivided, very important, undivided capital.
There were some seemingly warm words from the president to the Palestinians, but listen to the cheers from the pro-Israel, pro-Trump crowd. This was a gift for Israel, a non-starter for the Palestinians, and a delighted Israeli Prime Minister spelt it out.
On this day, you too have charted a brilliant future for Israelis, Palestinians, and the region by presenting a realistic path to a durable peace.
After a meeting with his cabinet, the Palestinian president was live addressing his people. Jerusalem is not for sale, he said, and your conspiracy deal will not pass. The Palestinian people will reject it. The status of this place, the old city of Jerusalem, goes to the heart of the problems with this plan. The Trump proposal would make all of this, East and West Jerusalem, the capital of the Jewish state of Israel. The Al-Aqsa Mosque would be formally Israeli territory, because for Israel, it's on the site of the first Jewish temples. The Palestinians, Mr. Trump said, would get their own capital in eastern Jerusalem, but it would be over there, beyond the Israeli separation wall. Driving east out of Jerusalem, you reach the Jordan Valley in the West Bank, Palestinian land that will now be annexed by Israel immediately. The Jewish settlements here too will become Israeli sovereign territory, despite the fact that under international law they are here illegally. It will all cause huge tension. Israel is deploying more troops to the area in preparation. Vera Baboon is a member of the Palestinian National Council and former mayor of Bethlehem.
Donald Trump, the Israeli leadership, are targeting to control, annex, or to have sovereignty of these areas in settlements. But this is the question. The peace deal, will it end in what? In a state? To have a state, we need that land.
On the edge of Ramallah, young Palestinians clashed, as usual, with Israeli soldiers. It is their future that's being moulded. We want to fight the Israelis until freedom and victory, they tell us. We will see much more of this in the weeks ahead and well beyond.
The only people against the deal are the Muslim public, who once again have refused to accept the status quo, despite their rulers abandoning them and maintaining relations with the Zionist entity. Whilst the US agenda has always been to support the Zionist entity as a means to achieve its strategic agenda in the region, the timing of the plan's release appears to have been more to do with Zionist and US domestic politics than with the administration's belief that the moment is ripe to launch it. Senior US administration officials have been saying for almost 2 years that the plan was essentially complete. It seems more than coincidental that it was released on the very day that the Zionist Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was indicted on fraud and corruption charges while Trump is undergoing impeachment hearings. Both are also in the midst of electoral campaigns. The release of the plan now could help Netanyahu by changing the subject in the Zionist entity from the corruption allegations he is facing to the issue of security. Trump will do all he can to distract from his impeachment trial. Once again, Muslim land is being played with by foreign nations for their own narrow agenda. The Muslim rulers once again sat in line when Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, visited them all previously and told them they would not be party to the negotiations, but will be accepting it. The outcome of the deal will likely be the same as all the agreements before it, destined to fail. The idea of a two-state solution, which Israel has proposed in the past, is a dead deal, since it only furnishes Zionist interests by removing all civil and human rights away from the Palestinians.